Hello, my name is Julia Kraus. It is April 20th, 2023. I am here with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, and
I'm Cara Patrick. This interview is a part of the Tidewater Main Street Project. Who do we have the pleasure of speaking with today?
I am Alvin Lomax, a former teacher at Sinclair Walker High School, Saluda, Virginia.
when and where were you born?
I was born in King William County, Virginia, on the 12th of November, 1932. My educational career has been, I attended and graduated from King William Training School in 1949. I entered Hampton Institute, now University, in September of 1949, graduated with a bachelor's degree in pre-med chemistry and biology major in 1953. While at Hampton, I joined the advanced ROTC program and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Army on the 1st of June, 1953. After graduating from Hampton in 1953, I entered the military in September of 1953, completing the Associate Officer's Basic Training Course at Fort Bliss, Texas. After completing my work at Fort Bliss, Texas, I was transferred to Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas, for a special program relating to war management. I remained on active duty for approximately 2 years. After leaving the military, I came back to my home in King William, and in September of 1955, I became science teacher at Sinclair Walker High School. And while there, I taught general science 8, 9, biology, and chemistry, and 1 semester of general mathematics. I was very much impressed with the programming of Sinclair Walker High School. It followed through with a clear-cut indication of what education is proposed to do, as well as the programs that are introduced to enhance the objective of the school. And I always like to include a definition of education so that we'll be on the same wavelength. Education is a process, and you may ask the question, a process of what? That is the key issue, by which behavior is modified. And the behaviors involved reinforcement of knowledge that the students bring to the situation and the advancement of that knowledge, the refinement of skills that they may have brought to that educational setting, understanding, being able to relate information to practical situations, as well as project how that information may be used in the future. The third is attitudes. You have to have a mode and a desire to learn, to understand, to work with, and be appreciative of your experiences, to have a knowledge of how the educational system was derived. And then the last one is appreciation. And that's a very catch-all kind of thing where you're concerned with individuals expanding their associative skills. Now, when we talk about that, we are concerned about items that you come in contact with every day, like you introduce your likes and your dislikes. And our objective in the process of educating an individual is to maximize their likes and to minimize their dislikes, using the dislikes as a projection for enhancing similar experiences in future situations, not only from the teaching aspect, but as well from the learning aspect. When we talk about education, we're talking about a unique process that helps individuals to become more rational in their decision-making and talk language. This becomes a very critical issue when you're dealing with content material. It was very interesting in 1955 when we had a major change in the research of this country that expanded beyond the country with the launching of Sputnik. And that enhanced many changes in the educational process. And that Sinclair Walker was not an exception, because there we were able to receive expanded funding for content areas as well as the laboratory equipment for science teaching and other like experiences. For those persons who were already in the teaching profession, they had opportunities funded by the National Science Foundation for persons to take coursework during the summer at an institution of higher education of choice. As a result of that, advanced information regarding the research associated with the construction and the launching of Sputnik, which created a major change in all aspects of education. Geography and history. Many of the institutions of higher education provided opportunities for individuals to advance their training and their experiences so they can transfer those to the teaching learning situation at hand, which was Sinclair Walker High School. That encouraged some students in science to be more concerned about, now, how does this affect my life, my area, my hometown, and so forth. And there were those who read widely and observed the media to see how Sputnik was produced or manufactured, really. And then, of course, it encouraged some kids to ask questions that were related to chemical composition, biological and radiological concerns. Every person who was concerned about the process of education began to take on a new value system regarding how science research affects one's daily life. And that became a coordinated, collective effort in the teaching learning process. The social studies programs, along with the natural sciences, began to merge to the extent of interrelating objectives that connected for an understanding of how research is conducted, not just an assumption. We were very fortunate at Sinclair Walker High School to have a superintendent, Mr. T.P. Harwood, as a concerned individual about providing materials and supplies and experiences for teachers and for students. As a result of that, I was the head of the science department, and I had an excellent opportunity to broaden the experiences of my students. Growing out of that, Sinclair Walker was a member of the District 3 of the Virginia Teachers Association, which was the African-American group at that time. And they had 2 levels of participation to examine learning experiences of students, both from demonstrative practices by projects that they did, as well as through written tests. The written tests provided an extended opportunity for our students to demonstrate their knowledge, skills, and understanding of scientific principles. And every year at the district level, which included the areas of King William County, King and Queen County, Charles City, New Kent, Essex, Middlesex, and the Northern Neck area, and then extended northward to Caroline and to Fredericksburg. The colleges that would host those institutions, those projects rather, were at that time, and remember this was in 1955, just a year after the 1954 Supreme Court decision, those were predominantly African American institutions, namely Hampton University, from which I graduated, Virginia State University, a state institution, and lest I should introduce also that Hampton is a private college that was established in 1868. Virginia State, 1935, when it became a degree-granting institution. That was a state institution for African-American students to receive post-secondary educational experiences. Virginia Union was the next or third institution that participated in the programs cited previously. It was an African-American institution established in 1865, and they had a religious background. In fact, it was a private religious institution. And of course, St. Paul's College in Lawrenceville, Virginia. Those were the four institutions that provided National Science Foundation programs for teachers, and also were hosting the science projects and tests for the students from the respective schools of the areas previously cited. We were very progressive at Sinclair Walker. In fact, it was a commonplace that in the 5 years that I was there and we participated, we were very fortunate to have students and the support of the parents, the school system at large. A strong PTA was characterized at Sinclair Walker as well. And from that source, we were able to work with students, and they became very successful. And they ranked the students on the testing first, second, third, and fourth place. We usually always scored in the first or second, very seldom third or fourth. First was the highest, second was second in command. And those students, as they progressed through school, they participated in the programs on the regional level, district level, and carried forth that same kind of interest in Science 9, mathematics, general math, algebra, and physics, as well as chemistry and biology. And that was very rewarding to the students and encouraging to the parents and the school system and the Board of Education. Now, as we go from that, we had a very high rate of graduation of students from Sinclair Walker High School, and they have excelled in many places in various occupations. I would be very remorse if I were to begin calling names, but with a period of absence from the community of about 40 years, a lot of things have happened, but we still have those in key areas of employment. In fact, the young lady who is president of our Mid-Peninsula African American Genealogical Society has a degree in law, and she has worked diligently to expand genealogy studies, and we now have participation throughout the United States and in certain foreign countries. And that person is Besada White, who is a resident of Middlesex County. Now, when we look at other kinds of experiences, we have had an expansion of programming. When I came to Sinclair Walker High School in September of 1955, they had recently completed a standard-sized gymnasium, which enhanced the athletic program, particularly basketball, and they had well-trained teachers and coaches. We had a lot of emphasis on student activities as well, because we wanted to have a balanced program for the persons who would be leaving after graduation to take up responsibilities in the community, or were going on to college or other post-secondary educational institutions. I'm going to pause at this point to see if there are some specific items that you'd like to pinpoint.
I have some questions of you. Yeah. This is Cara. I just say that so they know. I was wondering if there are any lessons you taught, because you mentioned you taught, I think, biology, chemistry, a semester of mathematics. Are there any lessons that you taught that you feel like stood out in those subjects?
Well, I guess from a professional standpoint, all of the courses I taught were very effective. Mm-hmm. And as I said before, in addition to general science 8 and 9, that took the name of the grade level: 8th grade science, 9th grade science, biology, chemistry, and then one semester of general math.
Okay. Are there any topics within those areas that you think the students found particularly engaging? I know you mentioned the space race, so I'm wondering if that influenced their engagement.
Very much so. In fact, it was interesting. One of the students who had demonstrated very little interest in biology, I'm sorry, not biology, but in general science 9, on a Monday after the weekend of the launching of Sputnik on the 4th of October, I believe it was, he came to class and he said, you know, Mr. Lomax, I looked at that on TV. I got some good ideas. I'm going to try that. I said, well, now, you remember, there are some dangers inherent with explorations that would not be controllable. So if you want to write up what you think will be interesting and give me a schematic, and I guess about a month or so later, I thought he had forgotten about it. So he came in very anxious on the particular occasion and said, I want you to see what I've been doing. And that was a student who had no real interest in science, but that particular experience and exposure enabled him to take a different focus on science, and he improved in his performances.
Awesome. Do you think your experience in ROTC and being active service influenced the way you taught at all? Very
much so. I was the training officer for my battalion, and of course I had a major responsibility for the programming of that. And my orientation to teaching has always been be firm but fair, and I still maintain that.
Yeah. What was your relationship like with the other teachers, either in science or, I know you mentioned working with history a lot. Mm-hmm. Like, what was your relationship like with those other teachers?
We had a very workable relationship because we respected each other's responsibilities and designations. Now, I did not mention my experiences at Hampton. I went there with the intention of going to med school, but after going on active duty, I changed my plans and went into administration of higher education. And that was based on the large percentage of students who had difficulties completing courses that the military provided for them. And I felt that if I could get in as an intermediary, that I would be able to enhance students in the future in preparedness for the military, and also to give them explanations of advantages of going into the military. It helps an individual become more disciplined. And some people, you know, they can float around endlessly, but fail to understand that you have a responsibility to utilize your talents that you've been given and supposedly refining.
Nice. Do you have any specific memories of particular students or maybe even extracurricular activities at St. Clair Walker that kind of followed that military path?
Well, I had some students who went into advanced ROTC at the institutions mentioned. And of course, Virginia State and Hampton both required 2 years of ROTC, Reserved Officers Training courses. And that made a difference in their level of performance. Now, in answering your question on a different side, there were those who felt like the discipline they had received in their experiences in the high school enhanced their ability to adjust more readily when they entered college. And in fact, the two persons out there, both Bethesda and Easton, were students of mine in high school. Easton also was a student of mine at Norfolk State. And at Norfolk State, which was my second level of employment in education, involved coordinating the secondary school student teaching program. And that was training teachers for to teach in the secondary level.
Okay.
And I also had the opportunity to teach introductory biology there, and history of education, and 6 to 8 others.
Nice.
And then my second key position at Norfolk State was Director of Student Financial Aid. And again, my military background regarding regulations and so forth, that you have to be very much aware of when you're dealing with federally funded monies as well as state and local monies. And of course, we had a very effective program. We started out with about 200 people in 1965, and when I left the program in 1968, we had expanded to better than 4,000. And there were regulations, and I was a stickler for abiding by those.
Wonderful. Yeah, I keep going back to your definition of education you gave us at the beginning, and I was really struck by your take on the attitude of students. How would you describe at St. Clair Walker the overall attitude of your students?
Very interesting. The students at St. Clair Walker High School, being a local school, you had generations of families who had attended the school, and they knew pretty much what was to be expected. And there was one person there for whom the school was named, John Henry Sinclair Walker, and he could look at a student, and that student would, now you are so-and-so's child, I taught your grandma, I taught your father. Now look at here, we're not going to have any playing, you're going to have to study. And not only in my class, but in all classes. And of course, the teachers had interchanges about, disciplining students, but it was very minimal disciplinary action required. The attitude was very positive, and they came with the understanding that we are here to learn. not just to memorize, but to utilize and expand.
Yeah. And how would you describe the relationships with the larger community and their parents and their families?
That was the revelation afforded through the active Parent-Teacher Association. And of course, Parent-Teachers Association meant the parents of students who were there or students who had attended, or parents of grandchildren or what have you. And that relationship was unusual, exceptional. They worked very diligently, and as evidenced through fundraising activities that were provided through the PTA periodically, and then visitation to the school. The principal was very open to family members coming to observe, and that helps to reinforce what we're all about, or what we were all about.
Yeah. Do you have any memories of maybe larger community events that were tied to St. Clair Walker, like May Day or anything like that?
Yep, May Day was a very interesting occasion. And I observed the first day I was there, the large number of persons who had left the area for employment purposes, primarily out of the state even. They would come back for every major holiday, and they considered May Day an experience that was realistic to them when they were students at Sinclair Walker, and they would come back for that activity. They would also return for commencement, of course, baccalaureate, and other major activities. And then they had a connection in music. In fact, one of the early graduates was Emmanuel Mansfield, who wrote, I believe, the school's song. I'm almost sure that's correct.
Okay.
And then, of course, there was an exchange. They had a Middlesex Glee Club that had a connection in Ardmore, Pennsylvania. They went periodically there to exchange programs, and they brought programs back to Middlesex.
Yeah. So what was your relationship to all of that as a teacher?
I was very much in favor of it, impressed because it helped to weld the community together and to maintain a respect for what the school existed and the community. Now, out of that music department, in more recent years, we had a young man to organize a group and travel throughout the world. And his name was Sherman Holmes.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't remember the name of his group right off, but they were very prominent.
I'll be sure to look it up after this. Mm-hmm. Thank you for letting me know.
In fact, he lives right up the road from here.
Oh, nice.
And his mother was the history teacher at, social studies teacher at Sinclair Walker. And his father was the teacher of veterans in King William County.
Okay.
And Mr. Walker was his father's uncle.
Oh, okay.
Continue.
I was just going to ask, because we've talked about Sputnik a little bit, are there any other big national, international, regional events that you remember while you were at St. Clair Walker happening and how people reacted to those?
Yeah. The May 4th Supreme Court decision. And I indicated earlier that that was instrumental in helping to gain additional equipment and teachers for all of the schools, as well as an opportunity for them to integrate the school system from teachers on through the students. Mm-hmm. It was very important.
Yeah, kind of building off of that, you mentioned the space race and how excited that got some of your students about science. Was that something they came to outside of school, or did you really try to make them aware of current events?
Made them aware of current events, and we subscribed to a national publication for students entitled Current Events. It was a 4-page monthly publication. And that gave an update on kinds of, it was really projecting the kinds of experiences that required an understanding of science. And when I say science collectively, chemistry, biology, so forth. And one other thing that I think when we began looking at what a school does, the curriculum is implicit enough for you to make a fair assessment. And we have to understand that the word curriculum includes all activities provided during school hours and or after school hours under the auspices of teachers, professionals. So that's an inclusive kind of thing. And many times when we had after-school activities, not only for sports and that type, but also coursework for community people. Mr. Holmes, who taught veterans, also included experiences with non-veterans for management, you know, how to manage your funds, make reasonable decisions that affect not only you, but your family and perhaps the community. All of those things were very inclusive.
I've several people have mentioned that one of the most important parts of St. Clair Walker to them was how much they learned. Like, they felt really prepared for like everyday life. Like, was that a big part of crafting curriculum too?
Yes, that is correct. You had your content courses, and then you had student activities, which included the band, choir, the NHA, National Homemakers of America, NFA, National Farmers of America. You had thespian experiences. I mentioned the choir, debate teams. In fact, for years prior to my coming to Middlesex, they had very strong participation with the neighboring schools with the debate team. Now, I guess I should go back and connect a little bit more clearly. You had, for educational purposes, professional educators, you had a local program, a local teachers association, then you had a district teachers association, and then you had the state teachers association. And of course, the National Teachers Association was that when I came on board was already integrated. And each one of those entities had issues that were evaluated and addressed in appropriate settings. I was an annual meeting of the Virginia Teachers Association in Richmond, and Virginia Union University used to host that particular group. It was a 2-day activity, Friday and Saturday. And then you had the district meeting, which was 1 day, and that was at one of the member schools of District 3, which was our district. And I had mentioned before, it included the schools in about 8 or 9 different counties. Was there another part to that question?
Well, I guess, like, it seems like y'all integrated the, like, life skills, like everyday life skills into, like, courses that oftentimes might not have them. Was that something you thought, like?
Yes, we emphasized that. In fact, the principal was very strong on making practicalities of the educational experiences. And that, well, it's a rural area, and we had the agriculture teacher. Well, that information between the science department and the ag teacher, and then the social studies teacher, all integrated into how better to serve your community. Meaning that you have land, let the land be a part of your survival skills, how to multiply the use of the land, crop rotation and so forth, which again goes back with the science and the agriculture department, as well as utilization from social studies.
This is Cara again. Julia was on the last few questions. I just was curious, because it sounds like you've had a very long and established career. What do you take to be your biggest accomplishments, both at St. Clair Walker High School and across your life in general?
Well, I'll start with St. Clair Walker. That was my first civilian teaching experience. Leading into that, my experience in the military enabled me to become a more effective teacher and communicator in the local setting. And then from my experience at St. Clair Walker, it was encouched in the response that my students demonstrated. I had students who had other skills. We did not have an art course as such at St. Clair Walker, but there were two students who had a teacher in elementary school who was an art student, graduate in the arts. They were able to transfer those learning skills into projects for the science department. They drew up charts for the biology department as well as for the chemistry department and general science. And they coordinated that with the agriculture area.
Cool.
Now, when I left there, my second most challenging experience was when I became coordinator of secondary student teaching and supervision. I had the experience of teaching in the civilian segment as well as in the military. So combining those with the objectives of the ed program at Norfolk State, I felt very comfortable with my experiences shared with the students. And in that connection leading into the fourth year at St. Clair Walker, I did a project on addressing dropouts and student attendance and success. And that I carried over with me to Norfolk State. And I did, I guess, 10 or 15 different, and I published 4 or 5 of the articles dealing with student retention.
Okay, cool. Do you have anything else before we move into your relatives in Cook's Corner that you want to share about St. Clair Walker or your experience in the education sector?
Well, I consider that to have been a very significant part of my life. And I have been known in many different situations that, now here's the man that's no fun in games, you better be prepared. And they had respect. It was not coerced. It was just, my relationship with them. And it was amazing, overwhelming, really. And we had very excellent student enrollment and post-secondary educational experiences. Some persons may have remained out several years, but after a period of time, they decide, well, I think college is what I need.
Wonderful. Yeah.
I value each of those levels of experience as being significant to me in accomplishing my mission to share with others. And I still believe that being firm but fair helps to clear the air.
Is being firm but fair, do you think maybe, is that a part of your life motto in a way? Is that something you take to the various sectors?
I take it very seriously. In fact, I don't expect anybody to do anything that I haven't done first in the professional realm.
Nice, very nice. Do you think that's translated over to your personal life as well, outside of the professional sector?
Yes, by precept and example.
Yeah, all right. Are you comfortable moving into talking about Cook's Corner a little bit?
Is there anything else? Let me see. You can cut off there for just a second.
Okay.
St. Clair Walker. Yes, the other one deals with my follow-up with the students. In fact, the most recent experience, which was very exciting, rewarding, and somewhat I would say touching. I had approximately 100 students and their children to send birthday greetings to me for my 90th birthday.
Oh, wow.
And each one of them had a little message or what have you, and, well, cards as well as telephone calls.
What did that mean to you?
Very uplifting. And it made me feel that my efforts were not in vain, and as much as they still remembered.
Yeah.
And some of them cited experiences that they'd had as a result of my connection.
Yeah. When did you celebrate 90, if I can ask?
On the 12th of November,
Nice.
2022.
Okay. Happy belated birthday.
Why, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Teaching is a professional career that is to be followed. It is not something that you take when you can't do anything else. It's a very serious position. You are molding the minds and behaviors of students, inexperienced people, and you have to be sure that you are providing them with the best opportunities for expanding their knowledge, their skills, their understanding, their attitudes, and their appreciation. And when we get to this music realm, you had the boombox period, and everybody was leaning with the boombox. That was probably the generation just ahead of you. Excuse me. There was a very excellent time to help persons understand that there are more ways of understanding music than just listening to one kind of music. Now, you may have a choice, but your choice should be predicated upon an assessment of what seems to be an appropriate combination. And of course, even they found out that right after that period, you had a number of persons as they matured with spinal problems because they were leaning with the boom boxes.
I had never even thought about the spinal problems involved. Awesome. Is there anything else you want to share?
I think those are the key items.
Awesome.
But I will say that the solidarity of intent from a professional standpoint at Sinclair Walker was outstanding.
Wonderful.
And it's being perpetuated by many of the students, two generations since. And I think if you're going to be a teacher, then you're going to have to learn how to deal with many different personalities and many different decision-making situations.
Mm-hmm.
And snap decisions do not work well.
That's good advice for me, I feel like, for life too, outside of teaching.
Well, you know, the scientific method of reasoning, identify the problem, collect data relating to the problem, and then come up with a hypothesis, and then or several hypotheses, and select the one that seems to be most appropriate for resolving that situation. It's
And be
not
firm but
just
fair.
it's not just a saying; it's a reality.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Julia, do you have anything you want to add?
No, if we want, we can go to Cook.
Yeah. So what, you mentioned you had some relatives that are
Right.
actually in Cook's Corner.
The lady who was married to the person who owned and operated Cook's Corner was my father's first cousin, Cornelia Smith Davis. George Davis was her husband, and they owned a service station and a restaurant combination.
Okay.
They had 6 children. All 6 of them attended school here in Middlesex, and 5 of the 6 attended and graduated from college.
Awesome.
And that was a tradition that had started with Mrs. Davis's family. She was a student from Hampton, and then she had 4 brothers, 3 of whom went to, 2 of whom went to Hampton, 1 went to St. Paul, and the other one went to Virginia State. And the brothers were in the trade school situation and became very successful builders. In fact, there's a church in King William that was designed and built under the supervision of one of her brothers. That church is Mount Olive Baptist Church in King William. And the brother was Rufus Smith. Smith was her maiden name. And her mother was my father's sister, and her father was my great-grandmother's nephew.
Do you have any memories of her experience in the area of Cook's Corner or any of that?
Well, except for the fact that she was always addressing the importance of education, as evidenced by the fact that she had the 6 children and 5 of the 6 graduated, all of them attended college. And she had concerns about the meals that they served at the facility. And then, of course, her husband was a graduate of Virginia State in auto mechanics, but he went into farming as a side issue. Awesome. And then they had the service station. And one of the sons was in auto mechanics and business combination.
Awesome. Yeah. Do you have any other questions?
Do you remember at all, like, whether, like, how long their business stayed open, or?
I would be guesstimating, but excuse me, I would say 30 years. Because her parents lived next door to my parents. Well, my father's father was the brother to Mrs. Davis's mother, and the properties were adjacent. And they came back on a regular basis, and I was born in 1932, and from, I would say, the time I could remember until the late 50s, early 60s, maybe early 60s, they were still in operation.
And
They meaning Cook's Corner.
Cook's Corner. Do you know why Cook's Corner closed?
Well, I think I can speak only with reference to their operation. The children moved away, and then as the parents passed, well, the mother passed first, and then the father lived on for 8 or 10 years. And he lessened the use of the facility as a restaurant and concentrated more on the service station. And after he became disabled, well, began to have health issues, they discontinued the operation.
Working as an educator in this area, I guess I'm curious, like, you must have witnessed many people leaving the area. What are your thoughts on the way that's happened over the years and what you've observed?
Well, the question is, what were the contributing factors of the transiency of the population out of the area? Economics was the foundation, and then racial issues were second. The economic situation created the problem because there were very limited opportunities for employment, and persons had to commute great distances. We had persons commuting to Newport News daily, Williamsburg, Richmond, Northern Virginia. And as the economy excelled in the cost of living, they found it more reasonable to identify or remain in the area where they're closer to their places of employment. And as a result of that, their children were reared away from Middlesex and other rural communities like Middlesex. And of course, they didn't have the same connection to the area that the people, the parents or the grandparents, as you go farther and farther away. A lot of them, persons in Middlesex County, went to New Jersey, to New York, Pennsylvania, and a few to Maryland and Washington. And there may have been other areas, but those were the most prominent areas. And they were seeking enhanced employment opportunities to meet their needs. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
You looked like it was another part you wanted.
It was, I was just thinking, I found out I have to leave right now. So Cara can continue the interview, but thank you so much, sir.
You're very welcome. Good to meet you.
Good to meet you too.
I hope you'll find what we've talked about to be beneficial.
Definitely, and it was really great to, we've heard a lot about how much people enjoyed Mr. Lomax, so it's been good to put a face to the name.
Why, thank you.
Safe travels, you. Yeah. All right, well, I think we've exhausted all of our questions, but if you have anything else you want to add to the record?
Not right off. I think this is a very important activity that you are addressing. It should be a model program for other, especially rural areas. Mm-hmm. There was one other organization that I didn't mention, and I feel the need to do so. It's impacted all of the counties of Virginia. At that time it was 120 when they were organized. And that was the Negro Organization Society. Excuse me, I hope this isn't picked up on.
It'll be A-okay. Deborah, who was in here earlier, processes all of them. And
Well, anyway, The Negro Organization Society was, as the name suggests, a group of African Americans who in 1910, during the conference of the farmers at Hampton Institute, decided they needed a plan that would enhance the quality of life for rural people, including African Americans. As a result of that, they organized the organization became known as the Negro Organization Society, being implemented in 1912. It was studied and developed from 1910 to 1912. And the purpose of that group, the purposes were 5 in number. They included improvement in health, improvement in farming skills, improvement in civic participation, improvement in land ownership, and the 5th was enhancing skills for our youth. Growing out of that, every county had a subunit that addressed those 5 or 7 issues. And they had an annual meeting of those persons who had served as officers in the local communities at a church to begin with. Mm-hmm. And then they started meeting at Virginia Union, Virginia State, Hampton. And then in 1948, they purchased a site down in Gloucester at Cappahoosic, right on the York River. And that was originally the Moton Center. And it was named after R.R. Moton, who was one of the former presidents of Tuskegee Institute in Alabama and a graduate of Hampton. And with that organization, they developed a unit of it entitled the Youth Division of the Negro Organization Society. I had the opportunity of serving as president from 48 through 50, into 50. And that program became a very real asset for student life. As a result of it, they were able to give scholarships for students to attend college, and it could be renewed depending on the student meeting the continued requirements or criteria. And also, it provided from June the 15th through August the 15th, opportunities of 1 week or 2 weeks on site where the persons would be given tutorials, afforded tutorial skills and or recreational, organized recreational activities. Mm-hmm. And of course, the fundraisers to support and help to sustain that came from each of the counties by way of those committees, subcommittees of the Negro Organization Society, sponsoring a Queen's contest. And that was terminated, completed in the spring of each year at the site. And the Queen from each county reported the money raised, and the person who had the highest money would be the Queen, and then the second highest would be the Queen's attendant. Mm-hmm. And then you had activities that were comparable to a Queen's setting. Now, the interesting thing was that experience of a week was only $4, room and board, and you could expand it to 2 weeks. And that had facilities for both boys and girls. And that operated until about 1958. And after that, they discontinued the program. And the other part on the statewide level that was very significant during the period of the organization of the Negro Organization Society into the 30s was a high period of incidences of tuberculosis. The Negro Organization Society purchased an acreage of land in Burkeville, Virginia, where they built the Burkeville Sanatorium to treat tubercular patients. Mm-hmm. And of course, they still had the emphasis of implementing those 6 other objectives of the organization. So the Negro Organization was a real thrust to the organization and development of the African American concerns for enhancing opportunities.
Yeah. And it sounds like you were able to really make an impact on that organization as well, serving in leadership.
I was the president for 2 years. And I must have been I was the 3rd president. And during my administration was when the site at Capahosic was purchased.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And was that an elected position or a volunteer?
No, elected.
Okay, cool.
And the persons who coordinated that were the Jeans supervisors. They were the African American women who benefited from Anna T. Jeames Fund, JEAN''S Fund. And their salaries were paid in part by that particular group. Our Jeans supervisor was Miss India Hamilton. Mm-hmm. And in her tenure for King William County, which spanned about 20 years, she published on a quarterly basis from 1925 until 1930, well, in the 30s, a quarterly publication addressing the 7 objectives of the Negro Organization Society, which was, and they had a section in there that identified kinds of businesses that African Americans owned, and then some of those that were owned by other race who shared in the concerns for implementing and improving the quality of life for all people. Okay. Very interesting group.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to look more into that. I hadn't heard of it.
Mm-hmm. It was started in 1910 and began to be implemented in 1912. Started at Hampton, which was Hampton Institute then.
Cool, yeah. All right.
And there was no other state in the United States that had a program of that type.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Well,
I'm sorry I didn't include that earlier.
No, I appreciate you including it now. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
You're very welcome. Yeah. And let me see. Well, I gave you the organizational structure for the professional organization. You had the local, the district, the state, and then the district met 3 times per year. The state met once per year, usually in the fall, the 3rd Friday and Saturday of September. I think I have pretty much covered what comes to mind.
Yeah.